I started on social media, I started a hashtag 10-year terrain. And the reason I did that was because I saw a beach in Spain being sprayed with bleach before they let people back on it.
What?
And yeah, right? And so it was just like, oh man, this is
You're doing it wrong. All right, welcome to the New Age Human Podcast. I'm your host, John Estacio, and today's guest is Dr. Catherine Clinton, who is a naturopathic physician with a focus on gut health, autoimmunity, and psychoneuroimmunology. That's a mouthful, right? So we actually go into a couple really cool topics. We talk about her personal journey and story of being diagnosed with a long list of stuff for autoimmune disease that affects the gastrointestinal tract. We dive into terrain theory versus germ theory, which goes directly against mainstream school of thought. I know you're going to love that one. We also elaborate on quantum biology. And at the very end, we go over her top 3 quantum biology hacks for optimal health. Now, if you want to support the show, please share with a friend. If you're listening, you can always leave us a great review on Apple Podcasts. And if you're watching, go ahead and gently, ever so slightly, smash that subscribe button. If you want to get in contact with me, feel free to go to newagehuman.com, record a message, or send me an email. Now, without further ado, let's get to the show. Once again, thank you for coming onto the show. Dr. Catherine Clinton, thank you. Welcome. Welcome.
Well, thank you so much, John, for having me. I'm really excited to dive into some of my favorite topics with you.
Awesome. And I love that they're your favorite topics, right? Because we're gonna go dive in there and probably confuse people and open some brains. That's what I'm looking to do. Just like if you haven't heard this before, I know that you do really good at breaking things down and being aware of how complex this stuff can be, right? I definitely want to start out with having everybody get a feel for where you come from. I know that you have a story behind having an autoimmune disease that changed everything for you to what you're doing today. Could you briefly share that with us?
Absolutely, absolutely. So I went to naturopathic medical school. I actually assisted with a midwife for almost a decade, and I knew that wasn't for me, but she had such incredible natural modalities that I wanted to go to naturopathic medical school and become a naturopathic physician. And I was in my second year of school, and it was that like classic med school initiation phase, right? So like you got to be in class, sign the roster at 7. If you are a minute late, then you flunk the class and have to wait a year to start over. You know, the
That's
whole like
stressful.
it's so stressful. And it was just that like, are you material to be a doctor kind of thing, you know? And it was the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back. And I was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis, which is a autoimmune condition that affects the GI tract and the colon specifically. And I was diagnosed with Hashimoto thyroiditis, which is another autoimmune that affects the thyroid gland. I was diagnosed with Lyme disease, multiple GI infections, and parasites. It was just sort of that like domino effect.
That's a
And
whole list.
yeah, when I do it, I go for it.
I'm
So
thinking about like they probably give you your diagnosis and it's like that CVS forever receipt where it's just this list that keeps going.
yeah, exactly. Funny now, not so funny at the
Correct.
time. Everyone was like, "Oh, this is going to make you a great doctor," and it was just like,
Mm-mm.
that's not what I want to hear. But I was in the perfect place. I was in naturopathic medical school. I was right down the hill from a very progressive allopathic mainstream medical school, across the river from an acupuncture school. So I really had all these amazing tools at my fingertips, and I was able to kind of piece my physical health back together and get back into school, get back into clinic and seeing patients. But there was definitely a piece missing. I mean, for anybody who's had a chronic disease, getting back to that place where you can be productive is wonderful, but it's probably not the picture of health, right?
Yeah.
And so the mentor that I was working with, the Dr. Satya Ambrose, she's absolutely incredible. And she started pushing me to look at psychoneuroimmunology. And that's just a big fancy word for how our thoughts impact our biology. And I was resistant at first because just like, you know,
Was it a little
anybody else,
like a little too woo woo or
no,
just
a little too much work.
oh
I I wanted like a pill or a lifestyle change or weekly acupuncture. Couldn't we do
yeah.
that instead of deal with my emotions and my reactions and all this stuff? But of course, no, we couldn't because they have such an impact on our biology. And it was at the same time I was researching mitochondrial function, and so that just blew the doors open for me on quantum biology.
Mm.
And as soon as I say those words, people are like, "What are you talking about quantum biology?" Right? And it really is the study of quantum phenomenon, so tunneling, coherence, entanglement, superposition, all of these different quantum phenomenon that have been relegated to the lab, right? They're not supposed to happen in the wet, chaotic mess of a living system. But now we know, since the early 2000s, we have a lot of evidence that's been mounting showing how these quantum phenomena actually are happening in our biology in the smallest pieces. So, on that nano size scale, our mitochondria, our proteins, our enzymes, our DNA, all of these things seem to be involved in these quantum phenomenon that, like I said, are usually relegated to some, quantum physics laboratory experiment. And the way they do that is they shield the experiment from any kind of vibration or sound. They cool it below absolute zero where no life can exist, right? So when quantum biology research started coming out in the early 2000s, quantum physicists were like, absolutely not. There's no way. But what we found, like Fleming and Ingle out of UC Berkeley, what they found, and Seth Lloyd from MIT, they found that the chaos of a living system is what's actually guiding these quantum phenomenon. It's actually a necessary piece. And so it's a really exciting time because once you reduce it down to that level, you start to see how interconnected everything is. I mean, we are sharing electrons with whatever is next to us and near to us, and the lines start to blur between an individual and a collective. And so I'm really hopeful that this emerging field of science brings us that interconnection, brings us to the idea that it's not just isolated mechanisms in an individual body. It's really this continuum of energy that we all share. And that brings so much import to our everyday dealings as a society, how we deal with nature, how we deal with our own body. I'm really hopeful that this information will lead to a paradigm shift that we really desperately need in medicine right now.
Yeah, and speaking of paradigm shift, it looks like what you jumped into was the alternative, what people call alternative, but it was technically the original way of healing, right? Knowing that we're all connected, and then seemingly it's not in the history books anymore, or it's really hard to find. There are books out there, and I'm sure you were excited to find a solution that actually was going to work. And unfortunately, unless except the emotional part, right? But like, so you attacked your emotions, so to speak. I say attack like aggressively, but you addressed the emotions, and you. It sounds like it fixed and helped you a lot by simply helping with the emotions and then adding different modalities. Correct?
Absolutely, and I don't wanna paint a picture like I'm a guru or I have reached emotional enlightenment or something like that. Absolutely not. It was more an acknowledgement that those things have such an impact on our biology, and on the flip side, so, at the time, John, I was having a lot of anxiety. I was really sick, really depleted, and really anxious. And so when someone started talking to me about how my thoughts could be playing into my sickness, it was even more anxiety producing,
Right?
right? Because it was like, shit, there's another one. Oh, there's another one, like how do I deal with this? But it wasn't that I needed to, stop and change bad emotions. It was the acknowledgement and the loving acceptance of the range of human emotion. We're meant to feel all those different emotions. It's just when we get stuck in one that we can have biological effects, right?
Hmm.
And so that's really what it was, and it's still a journey to this day, you know? So I don't wanna paint a picture that I am up on the hill and have reached, this emotional enlightenment. It's just a loving acceptance of sort of my subconscious train of thought that, most of us get from our early childhood or even epigenetically from parents and grandparents and great-grandparents. So it's this journey of understanding how it all fits together, and rather than cutting out and getting rid of an anxious thought or a depressed thought or an angry thought, it's a loving acceptance of that and being able to not get stuck there.
Yeah, and that's something that I've been working on myself, and I feel you. And when I
Yeah.
started learning similar things, I'm like, I'm stressed too often, and now this is just another stressor. But to your point, yeah, like first of all, if anybody's watching, Dr. Catherine Clinton is smiling this entire time, so her energy is definitely in that high vibe zone. And when you start to be more conscious of your health and the things and and be aware of that your thoughts can and will affect your health, yeah, you're going to start thinking differently. And I see that when you started explaining that in myself too. So I completely identify with that. But I do want to get into terrain theory versus germ theory. Like this, I feel like is a hot topic, especially post pandemic, because you have a lot of opinions around it. And you, with your background, with your experience, I'm extremely curious about your world of it and what your thoughts on that and how does that approach work with your patient care and your treatments.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of my thinking has changed in the last several years, in the last 5 years, especially in the last few years, right? And I used to really love to talk about terrain theory, and I still do, but there's part of me that sees germ theory and terrain theory as two sides of the same coin, and placing the importance or the blame, so to speak, on the interaction with microbes. And I think for us to get past that, well, we have quite a few hurdles, right? We have just this lineage of the last 200, 300 years, and Louis Pasteur and all of that talking about how germs are responsible for disease. But we also have this really strange, or I guess it's not strange at all. I guess it's human nature to be seeking the longest life, to almost immortality, right? So if we're looking at like an ICU or a hospital trying to save somebody and life support, and this idea that hooking you up to a machine to elongate your life without coming out of that, without quality of life at the end of that, just for the sake of prolonging, we have such a hard time talking about death in our society. And I know this probably is not where you expected this
Let's go.
conversation to go. But, but it's true. I mean, we can't talk about health and disease without some kind of acceptance around death. And I, again, am not up on a hill when I think of, I'm a mom of three. And if you talk to me about death and my children, there's an instant visceral reaction, right? We're humans, we're attached to this physical material plane. But at the same time, if we're going to get anywhere when we're talking about health and disease, I think it really serves us if we put that to the side, that you know constant desire to prolong life at any such means. And if the theory around health or disease doesn't get us a longer life, right? Then it somehow isn't truthful, right? And I think with microbes and germ theory and terrain theory, it's really interesting to look at the conversations around, well, then what do we do? If it's not the microbe, what do we blame, and what can we do, and how do we escape death? And so that is one sort of obstacle we have in the whole discussion. But when we look at the history of medicine and specifically looking at the scientific revolution, for a long time we had these indigenous healing traditions and beliefs about health that were in a lot of places replaced by religious reasons, right? It wasn't a sort of energetic or spiritual indigenous cause of disease. It was a religious one. And then in the scientific revolution in the 1600s, we saw that replaced with science, right? So all of those things were kind of brushed aside. And if we're going to come to a consensus about what is causing disease, then we're going to find it underneath a microscope, right? We're going to isolate that germ and we're going to find that it's the cause of disease, right? Louis Pasteur and his sort of tribe from the 1800s and early 1900s. And then on the flip side, you've got this terrain theory idea with Béchamp, with Claude Bernard, and they were actually really close associates, Bernard and Pasteur. They worked together, they did research together, and when Bernard died, one of his friends actually published his work on his microbial studies, where he actually came to the exact opposite conclusions that Pasteur had come to, but that was never, ever acknowledged as far as we know, right? There may be behind the scenes conversations, but I don't think so, because when Pasteur found out that his papers had been published, he was visibly upset, very shaken that his friend had these beliefs and that someone would publish them and that they would be in opposition to his own ideas. And so you have these two sort of, is it the germ that's causing disease, which I think at this point we can just say quite clearly, no, it's not. Even with the most intense microbial interactions, right? Rabies or Ebola or something, these microbes are not always associated with death. And so for us to say that they are the one cause, just we know is a fallacy. And we know that from many transmission studies as well. Even up into COVID and the pandemic, they did reinfection studies, and only half the people got symptoms of COVID-19, right?
Wow.
And so what else is going on? And the terrain theory camp would say that that is a product of our internal and thus external terrain. What is happening inside of our body that gives microbes the chance to take over to cause problems in one person and not another. So it's really a fascinating discussion. And like I said, I'm starting to you see things from a different light, and it's a perfect time to do so. You know, every time we have a global pandemic, we see a massive change in the way we view health. And so we couldn't be better poised to come up with some different ideas about what's happening with our health and with microbes.
It's interesting how you said you like absolutely not the microbes, right? And I remember talking to someone about when there's disease, you see the culprit, so to speak, which is the germ, but the germ is only there because you're weak. And I just started, I think a good analogy to what you were saying is gardening, where I'm trying, the only thing that's like doing well right now in the garden is like tomatoes and I think pickled cucumbers. And they're doing awesome. But it took a while to get there because if I didn't take care of the terrain of the vegetables, all these little bad insects would come and start terrorizing the leaves and they would come in there. And germ theory would say it's their fault. But it's my fault, really. I didn't water them because I was just lazy. I didn't drink the water. Or, like that's us not drinking water and just going with the traditional standard American diet.
Absolutely, absolutely. And are those microbes attacking a plant, or are they participating in this endless recycling of energy and matter that happens on our planet at all times? You know, I think I started on social media, I started a hashtag 10-year terrain. And the reason I did that was because I saw a beach in Spain being sprayed with bleach before they let people back on it.
What?
And yeah, right? And so it was just like, "Oh, man, this is,
You're doing it wrong.
so very wrong." Yeah, so it's, you know, coming back to our place in the ecosystem, like, we are up on top with our bleach sprayers controlling the thing, and it just couldn't be further from the truth, right? We are enmeshed in this greater ecosystem, and our attempts to control it often backfire because we aren't in control of it. We are, like I said, we are enmeshed in it. We are a part of it. And once we kind of acknowledge and tend to our true place in the ecosystem, we start to see a much different picture of health.
Mm. I know that terrain theory plays a huge role in as far as like making like preventative care, right? What are your thoughts on like, hey, you know what? I'm in a really bad space and all these things are great for preventative care, but what about like I need something like right now? What are your thoughts on someone saying, well, a lot of the solutions for germ theory will come in, or you need to take a hard left and take this insane like atom bomb type of pill to like destroy everything that's in the body. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I have a lot of thoughts about this. But I think that we have gotten sort of caught in this idea that the symptoms speak to the greater picture when sometimes they don't. They the idea of, the nuclear bomb of antibiotics, right? In some cases, that will take care of those symptoms in that amount of time. But that isn't changing the garden example that you gave, right? We are still that same terrain. And while we might have stopped that particular conversation with a microbe, it's not a rebuilding spot, right? It is a continuation, and something else is going to happen because that terrain isn't vital, isn't able to communicate thoroughly with these microbes. So I'm not a huge fan of that, but actually, just to be honest, if there was a situation where somebody is not in that preventative stage, where somebody is actually teetering because of those symptoms. And I do a lot of gastrointestinal work, right? So a lot of this comes from that. If we wipe out the GI colony, it'll get rid of symptoms. Now, it'll bring other symptoms as well, right? But at in some certain cases, just getting rid of those symptoms to be able to repair can be valuable. Now, is that something that I use regularly? Absolutely not. But emergency medicine is also not something I use regularly, and I'm glad it's there, and I think it has its uses, right? So I think that I'm definitely in the terrain camp, but I think that there is use for all of it. I think the main problem is the way that we think, like, oh, we're going to take this massive antibiotic, we're going to kill all those microbes, and then it'll be okay. We clean the dirty gut or, the respiratory system or whatever it is. And that's just ridiculous because we are made of microbes. We are inseparably and intimately connected with the microbial communities in and on our body.
I like how you, well, I say I like, but I wanted to go back into how you were talking about your your work with children and their gut health. I say gut health because I know I'm going to mess up the longer word. And I know that a lot of the gut health is affected by your thoughts and your emotions. And it's interesting that it's a lot of kids you're working with. Are you saying that the kids are stressed a lot and are being affected emotionally? Can you go into that? Because I'm pretty sure there's parents that are listening right now and they're like, I would, as a kid, I was having a lot of gut health. I overcame it after a while, but I'm curious, like, what's that story look like?
Yeah, absolutely. I would absolutely say that our kids are more stressed than they've ever been that we know of, right? In recorded history. And a lot of those stressors are things we don't even think about, right? Of course, we think about social media and bullying and the state of our schools and community, but we often are not thinking about the lighting that the children is that the child is getting, the exposure to the electrical conduction of the earth. I really like to talk with parents about maintaining a child's negative charge because our cells thrive on that negative charge. And when we diminish it, it leads to disease and illness, just simply put. And what are things that diminish that negative charge? I mean, living indoors, getting artificial lighting all day, getting artificial light at night, being exposed to the library of industrial pollutants that our children are exposed to nowadays, and how that degrades our immune system, our collagen network throughout the body. So many different things are impacted by these, obstacles of modern day life that many parents aren't even thinking about. When I see patients and someone's coming in for eczema and allergies, and I start talking about gut health and nature, people are like, what are you doing? Like, let's talk about the skin. And it's also interconnected that a lot of times parents aren't thinking about the most important pieces of the puzzle.
Yeah, and it's interesting you said the negative charge. I'm thinking immediately grounding, walking outside in nature, right? The waterfalls, they produce a lot of negative ions. You can you elaborate on anybody for anybody that may be new to that concept of grounding and I'm sure that's part of quantum biology that those ions and negative ions and positive ions canceling each other out, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, some of our education has done us a disservice. We haven't learned that we are electrical conduits and our inputs, our electrical inputs are really important. So when it comes to earthing or grounding, the idea of putting our body in contact, our bare body, our bare feet, our hands, whatever it may be, with the surface of the earth, what we're doing is, that surface is a socket and we're the plug. So, what I mean by that is quite literally, we are able to absorb those electrons. We are able to absorb those negative ions from waterfall and ocean spray and even wind through the trees and the fields, right? The wind picks up negative ions and brings them right to us. And we're able to absorb those and shunt them to where they're needed in the body. So if I'm having issues with my gut and the cells and the enterocytes lining the gut, and they need more electrical charge. They need help maintaining that negative charge. Doing something like grounding or earthing is a beautiful, free, and easy way to collect electrons that will go where they're needed. I mean, not only is our ecosystem intelligent, but our body's so intelligent that we're able to do that. And it has really powerful impacts on the state of health in a child. And so, that's not at all what most parents are thinking about when their child is sick. But it's really, really a powerful modality. And the thing that I love about quantum biology is that so much of the research and evidence out there points at free, accessible ways to help our health. And we're so used to the latest device, the latest treatment, the best supplements, right? But this perspective of connecting with the world around us to gain that electrical charge is a beautiful thing because it empowers us on a real grassroots level so that we are able to make changes to our health. We're able to experience that. And then we're able to go to our doctors and say, why isn't this part of the treatment plan? Why aren't you talking about this at all? What should I be doing with the lighting in my house? What should I be doing with my child's exposure to nature? And we know from the power structure that is currently in place with pharmaceutical companies and government regulatory agencies that that isn't going to come from them. That change is going to come from us. So I think the beautiful thing about quantum biology is it offers so many free, accessible modalities for us to immediately start using and building that resilience. And then from the bottom up, like a grassroots movement, we change how medicine is done. We change how science is exploring health and life. And that's one of the exciting things and one of the things I love about quantum biology.
As you say that, in my mind I hear you hold the power, like some movie that you have the keys, it's in you. And the movie, the main character, the hero character, is always looking for someone else to help them, and when no one's there, it's like it's been them the entire time, right? And I feel like we're going through that realization right now as a collective, especially with the trauma a lot of people went through collectively, right? And I like how you put that
Mhm.
all together. And yeah, there's definitely so many modalities that are in that world of quantum biology. And I didn't even process it as quantum biology, but yeah, it's beyond. It's well, I in my mind I see it as metaphysics, but quantum is just below what you can see. It's beyond what you can see, and it's there, it's not there. Like that's just a whole nother world, right? Ant-Man is hanging out there somewhere, it's just hanging out. Yeah, it's trippy to see those movies and to think of a world within a world is another universe. And it looks like as we rediscover that universe, it does seem like that has been our universe the entire time. It's just that we were told a different story, and then we were accepting of a lie, a false narrative, right? And coming out of that, I feel like we're definitely waking up, and I do appreciate you helping with that waking up process to the a better way, right? You started to mention a couple, like you said, we went over grounding, we went over, I know you love structured water, but what are some modalities that you like a lot that may be surprising to the average person, or even the person that's aware of a lot of these quantum biology modalities, right? Can you share any that are like unique or something that someone would appreciate hearing because it's like just crazy?
Well, I think that, my standard 3 that I love and nobody gets away without, and he said, "Mom, I'm your son. I know about mitochondria." I was like, "Okay, all right, you're off the hook." But I would say that my top 3 are really aligning with the rhythm of the sun, getting up and seeing that sunrise and that early morning sun, getting sun throughout the day, and lowering the lights at night. That's one of my starting points with most people. And it doesn't have to be, it's safe sun. We can burn in the sun. We can cause damage. We're such a binary society that it's like sun is good or sun is bad. Oh, okay. Oh, sun's good now. I'll just lay out in the sun and crisp up. And it's like, no, I mean, look at all the animals in the world. They don't just lay out in the blazing sun. They all huddle together in the shade together. And so safe sun exposure is what I'm talking about. And and that is so powerful. Every single cell in our body has a circadian clock. Now, that means, and the research shows this, that means that every single biological process in our body is circadian driven. And we're talking about digestion. We're talking about our immune system. We're talking about our hormonal cascade and our endocrine system. We're talking about our respiratory system. We're talking about our inflammatory state. All of these things, I mean, our liver function, our kidney function, our pancreas, our insulin and metabolism, everything is driven by this relationship we have with the sun. And that's really not how we think of it in medicine. And so that's the first starting place I start with. The second is earthing, which we've talked a little bit about. And I think a lot of us have heard the information about earthing, and a lot of us think, yeah, a relationship with nature, that's good. Nature's good. I'll go there sometime. Um,
Sometime.
but really, when we can own it as a relationship, so many of us are living in unsafe relationships, unsafe partnerships, families, workplaces, communities, societies. And the idea that we can get safety from our relationship with nature is mind blowing when we experience that. A lot of people just haven't experienced that safety. I was just doing a doctor training talking about our role as doctors to provide that safety in an office visit. Oftentimes we're sitting there and we're taking notes because, oh my God, charting takes so much time. And if we can do some of that in front of the patient, then that means we get a little bit of our life back. And, we just are inundated with all these different things we're supposed to be doing as doctors. But really, one of the most important pieces of being a doctor is holding that safe space, because that may be the first time that person has experienced safety in their life, and giving them that opportunity to understand, oh wow, I've been living totally disassociated or totally in fight or flight, and you gave me a few minutes to see that there's this other way, right? And so that's what nature and our relationship with nature can do. We often think of, and back to that scientific revolution, like we were cast as the masters, the puppeteers, right? We go to nature and we extract the goodness, you know? And it's so far from relational that it's ridiculous. So if we can take steps back into a relationship, a real relationship with nature. I mean, I'm at the point where I see the sun in the morning and it is like a member of the family. I am grateful. And when that sun is covered, we are here in fire season in Oregon. And when that sun starts to get clouded over and just stays in this monotone state, you miss
Mm.
it. And you don't just miss going out in nature and playing volleyball or whatever it is. You miss that being, you miss the sun. And so earthing is just such a beautiful way to cultivate that relationship. So that's my second one. And my third one that a lot of people don't think about when it comes to our health is coherence and how our heart is really the leader of our biology. If we can be in a state of coherence, and usually that state of coherence comes from a feeling of gratitude, a feeling of love, a feeling of contentment. And it doesn't mean that life is perfect, but there is life. So we do have one thing to be grateful for, right? And it isn't this Pollyanna, you know, oh, I'm just so grateful and yes, everything's horrible, but I'm just going to ignore it and be grateful. It's not that at all. It's being able to see the gratitude and the good, even if times are hard. It changes the way our biology works when we're able to stay in that state of coherence. Then our heart actually has a completely different role. I mean, that vagus nerve that houses our parasympathetic nervous system, it innervates our heart. And when we're in that state of coherence, it directly innervates our frontal lobe so that we're able to make calm, rational decisions. When we're not in that state of coherence, that innervation goes into the hindbrain and the amygdala, and we're in that fight or flight, reactionary mode. And so many of us live there because of the demands put on us by modern life. And so just a few minutes a day of staying in a state of coherence can really have a tremendous impact on our biological function and our health. And when you look at it from a quantum biological perspective, it makes total sense, right? Like Engel and Fleming from UC Berkeley, that's what they did. They said that when a plant, actually, they were doing it with bacteria. They were doing it with photosynthetic bacteria. So when a microbe captures one photon of light, what happens is it gets to that photosynthetic reaction center where photosynthesis starts. It gets there in almost 100% efficiency, way more efficient than anything we have in our modern day technology. And how does it do that? It does that because the other proteins in that microbe are acting in a state of coherence. And coherence in simple terms is like everything working on the same vibration, right? And so when these proteins are vibrating in coherence, they're like nudging this photon along in the fastest, most direct path to that photosynthetic center. We see clearly that coherence on the smallest scales in our biology is really propagating the most efficient, fastest means of health that we have. And so those are really my top three non-negotiables when I'm dealing with my health, when I am yammering on to my kids about their health, when I'm talking with a patient about what things come first and lay the foundation for health, that's where I'm starting.
I agree with all of those. And I agree that a lot of us, including myself, until more recently, forget about the power of coherence and being and just present, and how that affects your biology and your stress and your decision making. And just like you were saying before, the stress helped, well, the relieving of stress helped with gut health and a lot of other stuff. Wow. So yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for breaking that down and sharing all of that. I know that I'm going to take some of that and use myself. I have a salt lamp right to my left as well, and I love it. I got to get another one for a night light, right? So when it's calming down, you turn those lights on. So yeah, thank you for your time today. We went over a good amount of things, and my head is definitely full of knowledge right now.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Like I said, I love sharing this information, and I really do. I see it as a grassroots effort for us to take back our health and then demand a different avenue of health from mainstream medicine. So, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Before I let you go, I definitely want to give you a chance to share what you're working on now, especially what you were working on today, or anything you feel the audience will appreciate, and also how to get in contact with you.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, I've been in the office today recording for the Quantum Biology Wellness Summit, and this will be a free event, and it's got 25 experts talking about just all of this stuff, how light impacts our health, how structured water impacts our health, how sound impacts our health. That's been a really fun rabbit hole for me. So many different pieces of that. And so that'll be coming up at the end of September, the beginning of October. And next year, I will be releasing my book, which I'm really excited
Nice.
about. And if anybody would like to continue the conversation, I'm Dr. Catherine Clinton everywhere. I didn't get creative with that. So that's my website, drcatherineclinton.com. That's where you can find me on Instagram and Facebook and YouTube. And like I said, I love to share this information. So I do in all those places. So
Awesome. Yeah, I'm actually looking forward to that. I'll definitely put that in the show notes as far as the event, as I'll be following you. I love your Instagram posts and all the amazing things you share. So I can't wait also for that book as well. So I think that's going to be pretty cool. Thank you so much for coming on.
thank you so much for having me, John.